Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun stood there proudly, hands clasped behind his back as he watched celestial deadfall fleeing off into the distance. Then he looked down at the lands below, and mused that he was now the number one figure in the north. In fact, all of the cultivators from the Vile Emperor dynasty were bowing their heads and clasping hands to him in formal fashion. Bai Xiaochun might not be from the Vile Emperor dynasty himself, but in the eternal immortal domains, respect was given to the powerful. It was something that happened on an instinctual level. Bai Xiaochun didn't need to say a single word. The local cultivators immediately released all of the people of Heavenspan who had been apprehended, whom he took with him back to Misty Sea Prefecture. Meanwhile, news of the fight between him and Celestial Deadfall was spreading through the north. Before long, information began to filter back to the Grand Heaven Master through his spies. The Grand Heaven Master could do little more than smile wryly at how Bai Xiaochun had handled things. However, after thinking the matter through, he realized that there could be some benefit to how he had done things. At the least, people would be impressed. Although he hadn't handled everything perfectly, there were certainly some unsavory characters who would be cowed by his display. Furthermore, as word spread, it would make Misty Sea Prefecture a more desirable destination for the people of Heavenspan who lived in other parts of the lands. The issue with Celestial Deadfall had been resolved, and nothing else had come of the situation with Merknine County. Bai Xiaochun was still suspicious about the latter, but neither the Vile Emperor nor the Saint Emperor had done anything further about it. In the end, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but suspect that the two of them had expected something like that to happen. Unfortunately, he still had no clues or ideas to pursue. Perhaps Gongsun Wanner might have learned more about it in recent days, but she wasn't in the second immortal domain anymore. Bai Xiaochun could only bury his suspicions in his heart. I'm in the mid-celestial realm. I wonder if I should challenge the 51st level now. Based on my calculations, the spirit automaton is probably asleep. After a bit more consideration, he made his decision, and headed to the damaged fan to challenge new levels. Time flew by. Another 2 months passed. During that time, Bai Xiaochun would occasionally return to the second immortal domain between levels, but spent most of his time on the fan. In one big spurt of energy, he went from the 51st level to the 58th. He was moving even faster than he had in the past, which made sense, considering that his battle prowess had improved significantly. Furthermore, he had long since grown used to the process of challenging the levels. At the same time, he was being very cautious. Based on how much time had passed, he was fairly certain that the spirit automaton would be waking up soon. Therefore, after finishing the 58th level, he decided to take a short break. As it turned out, his suspicions and calculations had been spot on. Only a few days after he left the fan, the spirit automaton woke up. When he found that Bai Xiaochun was nowhere to be seen, his anger flared, and yet, there was nothing he could do. Assuming that Bai Xiaochun had just gotten lucky, he waited around for quite some time before going back to sleep again. And thus, something of a cycle began in which Bai Xiaochun would calculate when the spirit automaton would be awake, and would make sure to never be there during that time. And that was how he got from the 59th level, all the way to the 67th level. HMMMPHH. When Bai Xiaochun wants to challenge some levels, there's no way some spirit automaton can stop him. Twice in a row, the spirit automaton woke up to find that Bai Xiaochun wasn't on the fan, and yet, had made significant progress. At that point, his eyes turned crimson, and he used some unknown but significantly costly method to force himself to stay awake for longer. I refuse to believe that I'll miss the shameless Bai Xiaochun this time. He sat there in torment, waiting, for an entire month. At that point, Bai Xiaochun finally returned to the fan. The spirit automaton should be asleep again, he thought. Looking around briefly, he blurred into motion toward the 69th level. Before entering, he looked around one last time. Inside, and before he even had a chance to see the level clearly, he suddenly felt a wave of killing intent that vastly surpassed anything from any of the previous levels. It was almost like a windstorm that sprang into being before Bai Xiaochun even fully materialized. He gasped at the sudden sensation of deadly crisis. However, there was no time for thought or planning. Drawing on 120% of his cultivation base and fleshly body power, he moved backward in a 9-meter teleportation. In that exact same moment, waves of pain ripped through him, as something like countless sharp blades slashed at him, reducing much of his skin to ribbons of bleeding flesh. And that was after he had completed the teleportation backward. The spot he had just occupied collapsed into nothing. As for the so-called blades, they were actually numerous tree leaves, each of which radiated battle prowess equivalent to a celestial. There were thousands of them, whipping about like a cyclone. Both shivering and howling at the same time, Bai Xiaochun continued to back up, convinced he had fallen into a trap. Obviously, this level was heaven-defyingly difficult. It's you, isn't it, damned spirit automaton? He immediately tried to leave the level, but found that he couldn't leave via teleportation. That seemed to confirm his suspicion. Ignoring the pain which still coursed through him, he flew backward as his undying live forever technique healed him. Meanwhile, the thousands of leaves were now shooting in his direction. And yet, things weren't over. Suddenly, another cyclone of tree leaves appeared behind him, radiating infinite killing intent as they headed toward him. Further off in the distance was a third, a fourth, a fifth, all the way to a ninth cyclone of leaves. He was now completely surrounded, and seemingly bereft of any hope. The source of the leaf cyclones was an enormous tree even further off in the distance. It seemed high enough to prop up the heavens, and was immeasurably thick. That tree was the only thing that existed in the 69th level, and would not ordinarily be this terrifying. But with the spirit automaton in control, the tree was withered almost to the point of death to fuel so many leaf cyclones. It might be possible for Bai Xiaochun to fell the tree with a single fist strike, but right now, he was facing such a deadly attack that not even being in the great circle of the celestial realm would have been enough to stand up to it. Only an Archean emperor would be powerful enough. Damn it, is he trying to kill me? As he looked around anxiously, the spirit automaton stood atop the huge tree, fused with it on a mental level as he controlled it. By now, Bai Xiaochun's level of control over the damaged fan had increased to the point where he would normally be able to see the spirit automaton. However, because of the way the spirit automaton was fused with the tree, he was not visible. Kill you? Exactly. The spirit automaton stared angrily at Bai Xiaochun, absolutely sure that it didn't matter that Bai Xiaochun had achieved a cultivation-based breakthrough, or that he had gained some enlightenment of the Tao of time. The spirit automaton had devolved into such a level of madness that he was willing to pay any price, even make the later levels easier, if only it meant he could push this celestial into a position of true hopelessness. I refuse to believe that you'll pass this level. If you do, then fudge, I'll definitely change my surname to match yours. Chuckling coldly, he stood there with hands clasped behind his back, completely proud and confident. Bai Xiaochun had no attention to spare to try to figure out where the spirit automaton was within the level. He could only look at the surrounding leaves, which came closer with each moment that passed. The leaves were inherently terrifying, much less the fact that there were more than 100,000 of them, all of which contained the attack power of a celestial. Suddenly, his eyes went red, and he shouted, "You're forcing me to do this, spirit automaton." Howling, performed an incantation gesture, sending out a stream of black light, which became a big walk. It was none other than his invincible turtle walk. Even now, Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure exactly where the turtle walk came from. He only had some guesses, and no real proof. However, there was one thing he was certain of, and that was that from the moment he had acquired the walk from the ovens, he had never encountered anything as sturdy. No divine ability, no magical technique, no level of fleshly body power, no magical items could destroy it. Of that much he was convinced. In the face of the seemingly endless tide of deadly leaves, Bai Xiaochun's heart pounded with fear, and yet, not despair. Howling, he produced his turtle walk, and then dropped to the ground with the walk on top of him. It's a good thing I'm skinny again, otherwise I would be in quite a pickle. As he sighed and settled down under the walk, the spirit automaton stood on the tree, watching. When he saw what was happening, his initial reaction was that of shock, but then he started howling with laughter. Has this shameless Bai Xiaochun suddenly been struck stupid? He said, his eyes shining with a gleam of ridicule. Does he think a walk like that can block 100,000 of these leaves? Soon, it will be to his despair that he finds I paid the ultimate price to make sure this level has been replaced with nothing but despair. He will never, ever be able to pass it. However, almost as soon as that gleam of ridicule appeared, and at the same time as Bai Xiaochun plopped onto the ground, the countless early celestial realm level leaves slammed into the turtle walk. And then, the spirit automaton's eyes bulged. Impossible, he gasped, shivering in incredulity. The scene playing out was so shocking that it seemed to defy all imagination. Not a single leaf could affect the walk, and in fact, the backlash attack caused them to shatter and crumble. It was as if the leaves were arrows made of glass, and the turtle walk was a boulder. No matter how many times the walk was hit, it wasn't hurt. At this point, the spirit automaton's confidence was in almost complete shambles. Impossible. How could this be happening? Damn it, damn it, damn it. This guy is a shameless cheater. This Bai Xiaochun, HHE. Don't tell me I really am powerless to do anything to him. The spirit automaton only continued to edge closer to madness. First, he stole power away from me, then he drove away all the other challengers. He nearly destroyed the entire world of the dark concoctors, and behaved even more shamelessly with the succubi. And now, he has a precious treasure that can do this? Damn it, what kind of walk is that? Although nothing seemed to be happening to the walk, underneath, Bai Xiaochun was still coughing up blood. The walk couldn't be hurt by any sort of divine ability, but the vibrations caused by all the blows caused Bai Xiaochun's 5 yin organs and 6 yang organs to tremble painfully. If he weren't in the mid-celestial realm, with an exceptionally powerful fleshly body and heaven-defying powers of regeneration, then he would probably have been reduced to a pile of bloody gore even before all of the leaves finished striking the walk. And even with his current level, it was still incredibly difficult to deal with. He continued to cough up blood, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. As for his powers of regeneration, they were working at their limit. Every breath of time seemed to stretch into an entire year for him. You just wait, spirit automaton. One of these days, I'll make sure you know exactly how awesome Lord Bai is. As pain stabbed through his body, he cursed and gnashed his teeth at the spirit automaton. And thus, both Bai Xiaochun and the spirit automaton went about cursing each other, separated only by the walk and the shattering leaves. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure how much time had gone by, but eventually, he recovered fully. And it seemed as though the attacking tree leaves were now completely gone. After double-checking to make sure things were calm, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and slowly tipped up the edge of the turtle walk. Confirming that the coast was clear, he rose to his feet. Surrounding him was a powder that was all that remained of the countless leaves, dry and withered, almost dust-like. When he looked up, the entire world had that same withered sensation. It was as if it had existed for just a bit too long, and was now crumbling away. Sighing, Bai Xiaochun put his turtle walk away, stuck his chin up and loudly said, "Can you really handle me, you little rascal?" He knew that the spirit automaton was surely in the area to hear him, and even sent some divine sense out in the hopes of catching sight of him. As expected, a roar of rage echoed out from the huge tree, whereupon a face materialized on its surface. Its eyes glared with rage at Bai Xiaochun, filled with bone-deep hatred, madness, and defiance. It was as if this face wished to eat Bai Xiaochun alive. "You're shameless. A cheater." It was none other than the face of the spirit automaton. Unable to appear physically in front of Bai Xiaochun at the moment, he chose this method to reveal himself. He hadn't originally intended to show himself, but in his horrific despair, and having been completely infuriated by Bai Xiaochun, he lost control to a certain degree. Startled, Bai Xiaochun backed up a bit as the enormous tree lurched forward as if it were about to attack him. At the moment, though, he still wasn't completely certain that the face of the tree belonged to the spirit automaton. "I guess there's one way to find out." Ignoring the raging tree, he cleared his throat, approached, and began to walk around it and examine it from different angles. As for the face, it moved across the surface of the tree to maintain its glaring stare. After a moment, Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, and then asked, "Hey, what did you say just now?" Fury burning, the spirit automaton said, "I said you're a cheater, and that you're shameless. Complete scum." "Cheater? All I did was put a walk on top of me to defend myself. Let me tell you a secret. The reason I have so much control over this damaged fan is that I'm here by myself, with no one to compete with me. Now that is cheating." Chuckling at his intentional attempt to provoke the spirit automaton, he looked over at the face on the tree. As soon as the words left his mouth, the face seemed like it might collapse. "You have the nerve to say it openly? Why you actually admitted it? What cheek? A despicable cheater. That's what you are. I hereby swear an oath that I'll never let you succeed." It wasn't that the spirit automaton hadn't ever encountered shameless people before. But none of them could possibly compare to Bai Xiaochun. The spirit automaton's outburst had confirmed to Bai Xiaochun who he was. "Fudge, it is you." Glaring, he lunged forward, pulled out the greatsword of the north and slashed it toward the tree. A huge boom echoed out, accompanied by cursing and swearing from the spirit automaton. "You just wait, Bai Xiaochun. Damn it, I'm gonna kill you. Shameless. Despicable. Incorrigible." The spirit automaton was coming to find that he didn't seem to have much to say, only those few words that he repeated. Either way, Bai Xiaochun was starting to get a bit angry. Furthermore, he had just undergone quite a painful torment because of those leaves. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to slash his greatsword of the north into the thing, reducing it, as well as the spirit automaton's face, into countless splinters of wood. At that point, he could sense the spirit automaton's aura leave the tree, whereupon he stood there proudly. "You'd better be careful, you little rascal. You just wait until I'm your master, and then see how I put you in your place." Up in the air, the completely maddened spirit automaton heard that, and nearly coughed up a mouthful of blood. "You just wait. Next time, I'll definitely destroy you. I swear it." After the spirit automaton left, the level faded away, and Bai Xiaochun snorted coldly as he was teleported back out onto the damaged fan. That spirit automaton has gone for too long without someone in charge of him. How rude. Seems I'll have to discipline him a bit more in the future. The more he thought about that analysis, the more correct it seemed. Furthermore, now that he knew the spirit automaton was currently awake, it didn't seem like a good idea to challenge any more levels. I'll wait another month. He'll be asleep by then, and I can go back in. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he looked around one last time before heading back to Misty Sea Prefecture. By now, nearly a year had passed since the incident in Merknine County. Misty Sea Prefecture advanced on a daily basis, becoming more and more of a bustling place as increasing numbers of Heavenspan cultivators found their way there. Both the Grand Heaven Master and the Giant Ghost King were proud and excited by how things were taking shape, as was Bai Xiaochun. Considering he was taking a break from challenging the levels in the damaged fan, he spent most of his time working with the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King to manage affairs in the prefecture. Soon, a month had gone by. Just when Bai Xiaochun was thinking about going back to the fan, something dramatic occurred. Overnight, spiderweb appeared in the 4 northern prefectures controlled by the Vile Emperor dynasty. It was just like what had happened back in Merknine County. The difference was that last time, only a single county had been affected, but this time, 16 entire counties in the northern 4 prefectures were covered so quickly no one had a chance to react. No one managed to flee the affected areas, nor send messages of warning. Overnight, the northern 4 prefectures became a land of death. Because of how quickly it happened, and because celestial deadfall was gone, leaving no other celestial behind to watch over the area, it all happened literally overnight. What made Bai Xiaochun shiver with fear the most was that, even though he was so close in Misty Sea Prefecture, and had acute celestial senses, he hadn't been able to detect anything happening. Only after the spider webs had appeared in full did he suddenly realize that all heaven and earth was filled with something like a sensation of rot, something that could absorb life force. Some familiar, evil aura. It was the very same aura he had personally encountered back in Merknine County. And yet, the crisis continued to build. Apparently, those 4 northern prefectures were not the limit. Almost as soon as Bai Xiaochun detected the aura, he realized that spiderweb had already appeared in places in Misty Sea Prefecture. Shaken, he immediately dispelled any thoughts of going to the damaged fan, and instead rushed toward the border. Meanwhile, the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King were already getting information about what was happening, and they were both stunned. Word quickly began to spread through the second immortal domain, leading to widespread astonishment. There were many people who didn't even dare to believe it was true. After all, it was a matter involving 4 entire prefectures. There was no celestial in those 4 prefectures, but there were dozens of demigod experts, and hundreds of devas, not to mention the countless other cultivators of lower levels. Collectively, they made up nearly a third of the entire second immortal domain. For so many cultivators, and so many powerful experts, to suddenly vanish overnight, without a single one being able to escape or send news, was a terrifying event that struck fear into the hearts of everyone in the second immortal domain. Events continued as the spiderweb expanded. It was around evening by the time Bai Xiaochun reached the border. The spiderweb was visibly expanding, building up in various areas in Misty Sea Prefecture. The Grand Heaven Master, the Giant Ghost King, and Zhou Yixing all looked around in despair, and yet, Bai Xiaochun was actually more nervous than they were. He had personally witnessed what went down in Merknine County, and as he closed his eyes and thought back to all of that, it only served to reinforce how he couldn't let it happen in Misty Sea Prefecture. Damn it, what are the Saint Emperor and Vile Emperor up to? Bai Xiaochun couldn't keep breathing calmly as the spiderweb expanded at rapid speed, and was in such a state of helplessness that his face was pale white. Even though he was in the mid-celestial realm, and also had the Great Sword of the North, whatever had come out of that egg sac could destroy all of Merknine County with a single palm strike. From what Bai Xiaochun could tell, only an Archean could deal with that level of power. Bai Xiaochun could already surmise that there was no life left in the northern 4 prefectures. Eyes bloodshot, he set about trying to set up a spell formation to prevent the spiderweb from expanding. Unfortunately, even if his spell formation had been stronger, it would still have crumbled in the face of the spiderweb. It already covered a large portion of Misty Sea Prefecture, causing the land to turn gray, the mountains to crumble, the rivers to dry up, and the vegetation to wither away. Everything was wasting away into dust. Xiaochun, we have to take our people and go. That's our only option. The Grand Heaven Master had poured blood, sweat, and tears into the development of Misty Sea Prefecture, so it caused his heart to drip blood to utter words like this. Gritting his teeth, the giant Ghost King added, Xiaochun, the Grand Heaven Master is right. Leaving is the only option. Neither the Vile Emperor nor the Saint Emperor will do anything right now. To them, it would be worth it to have this spiderweb erase us from Misty Sea Prefecture. Even Zhou Yixing offered similar bitter words of advice. Somewhat in a daze, Bai Xiaochun looked around at Misty Sea Prefecture. Everything was happening too quickly. Never could he have imagined that the land that, over the past few years, had been slowly transformed into a foundation for his people, would change almost overnight. He even sent some divine sense out to check on the cultivators in the prefecture, and found that some of them had blank expressions, and seemed on the verge of ravenously devouring everything around them. Eyes bloodshot, he closed his eyes and said, "Fine. We leave." His voice was filled with pain and helplessness. No one wanted to leave, not any more than they had desired to leave the Heavenspan realm. Misty Sea Prefecture had become their new home, but now, in the face of certain peril, they had no other choice. His heart twinged with pain, but he knew that he was powerless to reverse the situation. Gritting his teeth, he took out the Great Sword of the North, and then used the power of his mid-celestial realm cultivation base to send the cultivators from Misty Sea Prefecture inside of it. The truth was that the people were the foundation of Misty Sea Prefecture, and therefore, no matter where they went, it wouldn't be long before they could create a second Misty Sea Prefecture. The Grand Heaven Master, the Giant Ghost King, Zhou Yixing and other powerful experts forced themselves to keep a good attitude as they issued orders. Although Misty Sea Prefecture was large, the Grand Heaven Master had organized it well, and hadn't slacked off in any regard. Therefore, as the spider web kept expanding, and Bai Xiaochun worked as hard as he could, virtually all of the people in the prefecture were sent into the Great Sword. Soon, the Great Sword of the North was nearly full to capacity. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun hovered there in the air, watching the spider webs continue to fill the prefecture. All of the buildings and structures, even Bai Xiaochun's mansion, were slowly swallowed up. And of course, things didn't stop there. After finishing with Misty Sea Prefecture, the spiderweb began to expand further south into the second immortal domain. And for some unknown reason, it began to move more quickly through the other prefectures. Bai Xiaochun had no choice but to retreat in the face of the spiderweb. The entire time, his face was grim and his eyes sharp. He was simply waiting to see what would happen. From what he could tell, it was definitely a case of the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor holding back for some specific purpose. Whatever it was, the loss of an entire immortal domain did not seem like a price either would be willing to pay. They have to come, he thought, clenching his hands into fists. Expression flickering, he realized that Celestial Aged Spirit had appeared some distance off, his expression one of undisguised grimness and anger. Upon nearing, he looked at Bai Xiaochun and said, "The emperors really are cruel, aren't they?" By now, his own prefecture was filled with cries of shock as the spiderweb spread through it. Many cultivators attempted to flee, but weren't fast enough. Bai Xiaochun hovered there quietly with Celestial Aged Spirit. Aged Spirit knew that help would come eventually. After all, he understood a bit more about the situation than Bai Xiaochun. But at the same time, he knew that his cultivation base was not high enough to do anything about the catastrophe that was already playing out, other than save those of his people who he already had. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun couldn't even see the end of the spiderwebs. Everything was covered with the stuff, which emanated an aura of rot that wanted to take away all life force that it touched. By this point, the spider web covered about half of the second immortal domain, and was moving with a speed that only Celestials could evade. Mixed emotions could be seen in Celestial Aged Spirit's face, especially defiance. To him, the second immortal domain was home, and now, he was being forced to watch it slowly being destroyed. King Heavenspan, the incident in Merc-9 County that you reported to me was something both the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor had predicted would happen. As for the current situation, they have been secretly pulling strings to make it play out exactly like this. That is why your report to the Saint Emperor went completely unanswered, and also why he prevented the news from spreading. After all, you are not a celestial of the Saint Emperor dynasty, and therefore, are not as in the know as the rest of us. Within that enormous egg sac is the clone of a sovereign. When Bai Xiaochun heard that, he turned to look at Celestial Aged Spirit, eyes flashing. Sovereign? At this point, Celestial Aged Spirit looked up into the sky that hung above the eternal immortal domains, and the enormous giant that filled most of it. Back when the damaged fan came, it hit that enormous sovereign's hand and knocked off a chunk of black stone. Remember how both emperors went missing after that incident? It was because they were fighting over that stone. HMPH. To an Archean, a chunk of the skin of a sovereign would be extremely valuable. It could very well hold secrets regarding the way to break through to the sovereign realm. Even the vaguest of clues would still be indescribably precious, and could drive an Archean to madness. Despite how cautious the two Archeans were in their struggles over the chunk of skin, it managed to escape. Afterward, the two vicious Archeans realized that unless that chunk of skin grew to maturity, the secrets of the sovereign realm within it would not be unlocked. They knew that, eventually, it would reach the point where it would begin to devour life force. And thus, they knew that the incident in Merknine County was that very chunk of skin trying to grow. Neither of them were happy with the level of growth it achieved, though, and thus left it to its own designs. They wanted it to grow into a true sovereign clone. In fact, they decided to allow the second immortal domain to become food for it. They're simply waiting. When the sovereign clone stops growing, that's when they'll finally show up. In his fury, Celestial Aged Spirit didn't hold anything back, and revealed everything he knew to Bai Xiaochun. As Bai Xiaochun heard the story being told, he began to breathe heavily, and his heart sank. His eyes also began to glow with intense cold light. To be plotted against and abandoned in the end made him feel much the same as when he had been dealing with Daoist Heavenspan. Letting that clone consume so much life from an immortal domain is nothing less than the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor playing with fire. Although he had already had speculations that something like this was happening, to hear it right out of Celestial Aged Spirit's mouth caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to grow icier with every moment that passed. Although he wasn't the overly compassionate type, to hear that so many lives were being sacrificed was something he just couldn't take. Even if it was all for the sake of pushing someone into the sovereign realm to fight back against the enemy from beyond, it was still too much for him. Bai Xiaochun felt profoundly unsettled, and Celestial Aged Spirit's anger continued to build. Meanwhile, the spiderweb expanded and expanded. It was at around this time that a 3,000-meter-long lightning bolt appeared in the sky, rushing toward them at top speed. The sky seemed to rip apart from the shocking sound of the thunder that accompanied it, and even the spiderweb stopped moving for a moment. Bai Xiaochun and Celestial Aged Spirit looked up at the lightning bolt to see the Saint Emperor, his eyes shining with dazzling, holy light. Next to him was the cold and ruthless Gu Tianjun, and Sima Yunhua, with a soft, gentle smile on his face. And finally, there was the white-haired but sharp-eyed Chen Su. With Celestial Aged Spirit, 4 Celestials from the Saint Emperor dynasty were present. A flicker of excitement could be seen in the Saint Emperor's eyes that he just couldn't conceal. Completely ignoring Bai Xiaochun and Celestial Aged Spirit, he blurred into motion toward the spiderweb and began to inspect it more closely. Sima Yunhua and the other Celestials headed over to Celestial Aged Spirit to offer greetings, and despite how much they disliked Bai Xiaochun, gave him polite nods. Before anyone could say anything, an intense rumbling sound filled the sky as a black cloud spread out, quickly settling into the form of a huge statue. Towering devil chi surged out from the statue, causing everything to rumble as 8 individuals took form. One of them wore imperial robes and an imperial crown. He was middle-aged, the type who looked threatening without being angry. His eyes were especially noteworthy. They seemed to contain the transformations of all heaven and earth, and when he looked at Bai Xiaochun and the other Celestials, they couldn't help but gasp a bit. Although Bai Xiaochun had never seen him up close before, he immediately knew that this man was none other than the Vile Emperor. His imperial garb and Archean aura made him seem like a burning sun hanging in the sky. He actually looked very similar to the Saint Emperor, just colder and more callous, so much so that it seemed as if he could cause frost to build up everywhere around him. There was also something a bit more domineering about him than the Saint Emperor. If you looked closely, you could see that his pupils consisted of 2 pitch-black swords. He had not come alone any more than the Saint Emperor had. Behind him hovered 7 individuals, some men, some women, but all of them Celestials of the Vile Emperor dynasty. Gongsun Wanner, Reverend Devourer, Prince Demon, Celestial Virapaksa, Celestial Deadfall, they were all there. There was also a stooped old woman with brown age spots on her face. However, all of those people faded into a blur to Bai Xiaochun as he focused on one particular middle-aged man in a black robe. He clearly emanated the fluctuations of a celestial, and seemed impressive in a way that was second only to the Vile Emperor. As soon as Bai Xiaochun saw him, the man saw Bai Xiaochun. They were only about 600 meters away, after all. Daoist Heavenspan. Bai Xiaochun growled, his eyes turning bloodshot. This man was none other than Du Lingfei's father, Daoist Heavenspan. Bai Xiaochun. Daoist Heavenspan murmured, his eyes narrowing as he looked coldly at Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun had often thought about where he might encounter Daoist Heavenspan again, and whether or not he would be able to control the hatred in his heart. And as of this moment, he realized that he couldn't. It didn't matter that it wasn't an appropriate moment to take action. The instant he saw Daoist Heavenspan, both his cultivation base and his killing intent seemingly erupted of their own accord. He didn't say anything. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hold back. He stepped forward, blurring into motion toward Daoist Heavenspan. Daoist Heavenspan didn't seem surprised at all by this. Eyes flashing with sinister light, he stepped forward and performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, summoning his 9 Dao Gates. Dazzling light shone out as the Dao Gates created a spell formation in front of him. Then he pushed out with his hand, revealing the fluctuations of the early celestial realm. However, based on his battle prowess, he was very close to the mid-celestial realm. Stories about Bai Xiaochun's battle with celestial deadfall had long since begun to spread, and therefore, Daoist Heavenspan knew that he was in the mid-celestial realm. Thus, he immediately resorted to a trump card, holding nothing back to seize the upper hand. Unfortunately for him, despite his general understanding of Bai Xiaochun's battle prowess, he had not personally fought him in a long time. And therefore, not even the full power of his 9 Dao Gates were sufficient in this situation. Bai Xiaochun moved too quickly, and he was too focused on striking a fatal blow. Instead of resorting to fancy tactics, he simply unleashed a vicious fist strike. It was none other than the Undying Emperor's Fist. It wasn't a quintuple power version, but rather, quintuple. 15 times the original level. It was the most perfect fleshly body fist strike possible within the mid-celestial realm. And yet, things weren't even close to over. Bai Xiaochun also poured the power of his cultivation base into this fist strike, making it even more effective. The heavens thrummed, and massive winds swept about. Those present in the early celestial realm were flabbergasted, and even the mid-celestial realm experts were visibly stunned. As for those nearby like Celestial Virapaksa who were in the late celestial realm, they were also unable to conceal their surprise. Some considered stepping in to interfere, but none of them could possibly do so quickly enough. It took only moments for Daoist Heavenspan's 9 Dao Gates to shatter into fragments. At the same time, blood began to ooze out of the corners of his mouth as he fell back as quickly as he could. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered with killing intent. He had attacked in a devastating burst of energy, but Daoist Heavenspan was no ordinary opponent. Although his first 9 Dao Gates had been destroyed, they quickly formed back together into a 10th Dao Gate. Howling, Daoist Heavenspan sent it forward to block Bai Xiaochun's path. At the same time, Celestial Virapaksa, Celestial Deadfall, Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer all rushed forward to do the same. Under any other circumstances, Gu Tianjun and his fellow Celestials wouldn't have done anything. But with both emperors present, and with Bai Xiaochun holding at least a nominal position as a Celestial in the Saint Emperor dynasty, they had no choice but to suppress their aversion for him and step into the fray. Of course, the objective of the Celestials on both sides was not to start a huge battle, but rather to interfere with Bai Xiaochun and Daoist Heavenspan. King Heavenspan, calm yourself a bit. Celestial don't sink to the same level as that brat. Even as they barked various words such as these, Bai Xiaochun looked contemptuously at Daoist Heavenspan's 10th Dao Gate, and before anyone could get close to him, pulled out the greatsword of the north. Take this, he shouted, slashing the sword toward the Dao Gate. Even as everyone looked on in visible shock, the greatsword slashed through the Dao Gate as surely as if it were made of paper. Then, the raging sword chi continued on toward Daoist Heavenspan. Bai Xiaochun was gambling that the vile Emperor Dynasty Celestials wouldn't personally interfere with a shocking sword strike like this simply for the sake of Daoist Heavenspan. And he was right. Daoist Heavenspan's face fell as Celestial Virapaksa and his compatriots simply looked on with furrowed brows. Of course, there was no way that Bai Xiaochun could fight a battle to the death with Daoist Heavenspan right here and now. Even as his sword continued to fall, a cold snort exploded into heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, the vile emperor appeared in front of Daoist Heavenspan. All he had to do was wave his sleeve, and the entire world went dim as an unimaginable power appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and backed by natural law. That natural law would not permit any magical items to be near the vile emperor. As a result of his mere gaze, heaven and earth seemed to be reversed, and everything trembled violently. For the first time ever, the world treasure that was the great sword of the north left Bai Xiaochun's control. Shivering, it flew backward of its own accord, not willing to even stay in the same place it had just occupied. Bai Xiaochun was also hit by a backlash. His entire body vibrated, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as he staggered backward several steps. Even as he did, his undying live forever technique went to work, healing his wounds. A moment later, he came to a stop and looked up, shifting his gaze to focus on the vile emperor. At the same time, the Saint Emperor appeared in front of Bai Xiaochun, seemingly there to defend him from the vile emperor. Clasping his hands behind his back, he snorted coldly and said, "You're pushing things a bit too far, vile emperor." The vile emperor merely chuckled in response. Then he looked at Bai Xiaochun and coldly said, "Still interested in fighting?" The Saint Emperor looked on with the slightest of frowns, his eyes narrowed. Back when Bai Xiaochun had first stepped into the cultivation world, and had little experience in life, he might not have been able to detect the sinister implications in what the vile emperor had just said. But he was not that inexperienced person anymore, and instantly grasped the vicious trap contained therein. If Bai Xiaochun disregarded the Saint Emperor and responded directly to the vile emperor, then it wouldn't matter what he said, it would cause the Saint Emperor to lose face. On the other hand, Bai Xiaochun did not qualify to refuse to respond to the vile emperor. Only the two Archeans themselves had a high enough position to ignore each other. As soon as the puzzle pieces clicked into place for Bai Xiaochun, he snorted coldly, looked away from the vile emperor, and took a few steps forward. Turning, he clasped hands and bowed deeply to the Saint Emperor. "Saint Emperor, I await your judgment in the matter." In response to his words, the vile emperor's eyes flickered, and the Saint Emperor's narrowed eyes returned to their normal state. "He might be able to stop things this time," the Saint Emperor said coolly, "but he can't interfere every time. There can only be one ruler of the people of Heavenspan." That simple statement made his stance clear. Bai Xiaochun bowed again, then respectfully said, "Thank you for your support, Saint Emperor." Seeing how well Bai Xiaochun was handling things softened the Saint Emperor's heart a bit. However, he continued in a kind voice, "Now is not the time for such things. Please be patient, King Heavenspan. After we attend to matters at hand, I'll arrange for you to get the chance you need." With that, he looked over at the vile emperor. The two emperors were old rivals who could each guess what the other were thinking by merely looking into each other's eyes. The matter between Bai Xiaochun and Daoist Heavenspan was an issue of face only, and compared to the sovereign clone, was inconsequential. Based on their previous investigations, they had confirmed that the sovereign clone's cultivation base was only at the level of an Archean, and that it was definitely in the region covered by spiderweb. "It belongs to whoever finds it first," the Saint Emperor said. Then he vanished, to reappear down below on the surface of the spiderweb. The vile emperor snorted coldly and did the same thing, indicating his agreement with the Saint Emperor. The power of two Archean cultivation bases were unleashed, instantly punching a hole into what had seemed the nearly impregnable spiderweb. Then, the two emperors became streaks of bright light that vanished inside. The vile Emperor Dynasty Celestials all flew down to the hole in the hopes of observing the fight between the two emperors. Obviously, they wouldn't enter without a direct dharmic decree issued by the vile emperor. The Saint Emperor Dynasty Celestials followed suit. As for Bai Xiaochun, he stared coldly at Daoist Heavenspan before joining Celestial Aged Spirit to head down toward the entrance hole. He tried to catch Gongsun Wanner's eyes, but she was pretending not to notice him. However, it was very telling that, back when Bai Xiaochun began to fight with Daoist Heavenspan, and the vile Emperor Dynasty Celestials interfered, she had placed herself in an unusual position. Although it had seemed like she was blocking Bai Xiaochun's path, to him, it seemed more like she was preventing Daoist Heavenspan from retreating. That was enough for him to guess where she stood on the matter. Upon reaching the hole, he settled down cross-legged and looked inside, suspicious about what secrets this sovereign clone possessed. And thus, the Celestials from the two dynasties waited. Hours passed. Eventually, a shriek rang out from the depths of the spiderweb that caused the minds of all of the Celestials to tremble. The vibrations of magical combat also reached them from far off in the distance. Everyone outside of the gaping hole excitedly tried to make out the details of what was happening. Although they couldn't see the fight itself, they could tell from the fluctuations that a massive, earth-shattering battle was taking place. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.